My name is Katie, and at 32, I stood alone at my 7-year-old son, Lucas's grave, while my parents claimed car trouble. 3 days later, they arrived at my door with legal documents demanding his $860,000 trust fund to buy my sister Emma's dream home. My mother looked me straight in the eye and said Lucas doesn't need it anymore, but Emma's future children do. That's when I realized they had been planning this before my son even took his last breath. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever faced betrayal from those who should love you most, please hit that like button and subscribe. This story might just give you the strength you need to stand up for yourself. Let's dive into how my family's greed revealed itself in the most heartbreaking way possible. Growing up in my family meant understanding one fundamental truth: Emma was the star, and I was the supporting cast. My younger sister, now 29, had always been the beauty queen, with unlimited potential in my parents' eyes. While they paid for every penny of Emma's college education at a private university, I worked 3 jobs just to afford community college. The coffee shop at 4 a.m, the bookstore between classes, and the cleaning service until midnight became my routine while Emma posted photos from her dorm room decorating sessions. My parents funded every one of Emma's failed ventures with enthusiasm that never wavered. First came her modeling career, which cost them $50,000 in portfolio shoots, travel expenses, and agency fees that led nowhere. When that dream crumbled, they invested $80,000 in her boutique that closed within 6 months. The wedding planning business came next, another $40,000 vanishing into business cards, a website, and elegant office furniture that ended up in storage. Each failure was explained away as a learning experience, while my Dean's List achievements were met with polite nods. When I married David at 23, my parents made their disappointment crystal clear. He was just a mechanic in their eyes, not the ambitious entrepreneur who would build a chain of successful auto shops across 3 states. They attended our small wedding with forced smiles, my mother whispering to relatives that I was settling for less than I deserved. They never saw how David worked 16-hour days to build our future, how he taught himself business management through online courses after midnight, or how he treated me like I was worth everything they'd never believed I was. Lucas arrived like sunshine after a storm, born on a spring morning that felt like the world starting fresh. David cried when he held our son for the first time, promising him everything we'd build together. For 3 beautiful years, we were the family I'd always dreamed of having. David's business flourished, we bought our first home, and Lucas filled every corner with his infectious laughter. My parents visited occasionally, always comparing Lucas's modest nursery to the grand plans Emma had for her future children. Everything shattered on a rain-soaked Thursday evening. The drunk driver who hit David's car had a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. I got the call while giving Lucas his bath racing to the hospital, with my 3-year-old still in his pajamas. David died holding my hand, whispering that everything he'd built was for us. The settlement came to $1.2 million blood money that could never replace the man who'd shown me real love. I placed $860,000 in an irrevocable trust for Lucas's future, knowing David would want his son to have every opportunity. The remaining money seemed like enough to last forever until Lucas's diagnosis came 2 years later. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the doctor said, her words turning my world upside down for the 2nd time. Every penny that wasn't locked in trust went to treatment specialists and hope that grew thinner with each passing month. During those 2 agonizing years of hospital stays and chemotherapy, Emma's life continued its charmed trajectory. She met Brad at a charity gala my parents bought tickets for, immediately captivated by his real estate developer persona and promises of luxurious living. Their engagement announcement came with fanfare and a 3-carat diamond that Brad claimed was a family heirloom. My parents glowed with pride, finally seeing their golden child achieve the status they'd always envisioned. The house hunting began while Lucas was in his final round of treatment. Emma sent constant updates to our family group chat about touring mansions in gated communities, debating between properties with 6 or 7 bedrooms. She needed the perfect space for entertaining Brad's business associates, she explained, completely oblivious to my silence as I held my son through another night of pain. My mother chimed in with enthusiasm about future grandchildren who would grow up in such splendor. My calls about Lucas's declining condition were met with increasingly transparent excuses. Emma's wedding planning required their full attention, from cake tastings to venue tours that couldn't possibly be rescheduled. When I begged them to visit Lucas in hospice, my father claimed they couldn't handle seeing him that way. The truth was simpler and crueler. They'd already written off their only grandchild as a lost cause, focusing instead on the glittering future Emma promised. The final week of Lucas's life, while I held vigil beside his bed, My parents were touring potential wedding venues with Emma and Brad. They posted photos on social media of champagne toasts and sunset views, celebrating new beginnings while I watched my baby boy fade away. The nurses who'd become our extended family held me through the darkest hours, whispering that Lucas knew how fiercely he was loved. He died on a Tuesday morning just as the sun painted his hospital room, golden, finally free from pain. The morning of Lucas's funeral dawned gray and fitting for my shattered heart. I'd spent the previous night choosing between his dinosaur suit and his favorite superhero outfit, finally deciding he would want to be brave one last time. My phone rang as I was adjusting his tiny tie with trembling fingers. My mother's voice came through with practiced concern, explaining their car trouble, with Emma's laughter echoing in the background. Something about a blown tire on the highway, though I could hear the distinctive sound of a coffee shop espresso machine behind her words. Katie's former in-laws, David's parents, drove 400 miles through the night to be there. They held me up when my knees buckled at the cemetery, their own grief mingling with mine as we said goodbye to the grandson who'd carried their son's smile. 20 people gathered to honor my baby boy, each one there because they truly loved him. His teacher, Mrs. Chen, spoke beautifully about his curiosity and kindness, how he'd always shared his snacks with classmates who forgot theirs. The nurses from his oncology ward came in their day off, forming a protective circle around me. While I was collapsing into my best friend Maria's arms, Emma was documenting her spa day on Instagram. I saw the post later that evening time-stamped during Lucas's service. Champagne and face masks, manicures, and motivational quotes about self-care being essential. She'd even tagged the location, an exclusive resort 2 hours away, where she and my parents were supposedly dealing with their automotive emergency. The hashtags about living your best life felt like acid on an open wound. 3 days passed in a blur of condolence cards and casserole dishes from neighbors who understood loss. I was sitting in Lucas's room, still unable to change anything, when the doorbell rang with authority. Through the peephole, I saw my parents flanked by Emma and a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. My mother wore her church pearls, the ones she saved for impressing important people. They'd come dressed for business, not comfort. The lawyer introduced himself before I could speak, pushing past me with the confidence of someone who expected compliance. They arranged themselves in my living room like a tribunal, Emma checking her reflection in her phone screen, while my parents maintained stern expressions. The documents emerged with flourished pages of legal terminology that basically demanded Lucas's trust fund for what they termed family welfare. My hands shook as I recognized my own signature on forms I'd signed in my haze of grief after David's death. Emma had already selected her dream home, the lawyer explained, pulling out glossy real estate listings. $1.8 million in an exclusive neighborhood where Brad's family maintained their reputation. She needed $860,000 for the down payment, a number that exactly matched Lucas's trust. The timing wasn't coincidence. I realized watching Emma scroll through Pinterest boards of interior design inspiration she'd been collecting for months. My mother's words cut deeper than any legal threat could. Lucas was suffering anyway, she said, and this would give his death meaning. Supporting Emma's future family, contributing to grandchildren who would actually grow up, made more sense than money sitting useless in an account. She spoke about Lucas like he'd been a burden, lifted an obstacle, removed from Emma's path to prosperity. My father nodded along, adding that I was still young enough to have more children, while Emma might not get another chance with someone like Brad. The emergency clause they'd discovered in the trust documents was something I'd signed without reading, trusting my parents during the darkest moment of my life. As co-trustees, they claimed the right to redirect funds for family emergencies, and Emma's housing situation qualified in their interpretation. They'd been accessing my mail, I realized, knowing exactly when the trust would mature and become available. Every piece of this plan had been crafted while my son was still fighting for his life. Emma finally spoke, admitting she'd known Lucas was terminal when she started house hunting. The doctors had given us 3 to 6 months, she said, so it made sense to plan ahead. She'd researched property values and mortgage rates while I was researching clinical trials. Her wedding could wait, but the housing market was too hot to delay. Brad's family would only respect them as equals if they contributed the same amount to the down payment, and this was their only chance. When I refused to sign anything, the threats began immediately. They would contest David's will, claiming I'd manipulated him into cutting them out of any inheritance. The family lawyer had already prepared paperwork, suggesting I was emotionally unfit when creating the trust, grieving and vulnerable to poor decisions. My father mentioned witnesses who would testify about my mental state, though he wouldn't say who. The implication hung heavy: comply or lose everything David had left us. The first week after their ambush brought a formal demand letter that made my hands shake with rage. The family lawyer had crafted a narrative where I appeared as an unstable mother who'd mismanaged funds meant for broader family benefit. They claimed emotional unfitness during the trust creation, painting me as someone who'd made rash decisions while grieving David. The letter demanded immediate transfer of trustee rights and threatened lengthy court proceedings that would drain whatever resources I had left. Emma took to social media with the skill of someone who'd spent years curating false realities. Her posts about struggling to achieve the American dream while family members hoarded resources gained traction among her thousands of followers. She never mentioned Lucas by name, referring only to tragic circumstances that some people exploited for personal gain. The comment section filled with sympathy for her plight and condemnation for unnamed selfish relatives. My grief became her content strategy. My parents activated their church network with surgical precision. During Wednesday night prayer meetings, they requested support for their family crisis, describing a daughter who'd abandoned them in favor of money. The congregation who'd known my parents for 30 years but barely knew me rallied to their cause. My phone buzzed with messages from church members I'd met once at Christmas services, urging me to honor my father and mother by sharing God's blessings. The irony of their biblical references while enabling theft wasn't lost on me. By the second week, the attacks escalated beyond social pressure. Emma appeared at my workplace during lunch, creating a scene in the reception area. She wailed about being denied basic family help while holding designer shopping bags, claiming I was hoarding millions while she struggled. Security eventually removed her, but not before several clients witnessed the spectacle. My boss called me in to discuss the disruption to our professional environment, his discomfort obvious as he suggested I take time off to handle personal matters. The discovery that my parents had emptied my childhood savings account hit like a physical blow. The account opened when I was 5, with birthday money from grandparents, had remained joint because I'd never thought to change it. 30 years of small deposits, my paper route, money, babysitting cash, every dollar saved for the future they promised would be bright. They'd withdrawn all $12,000 the day after I refused to sign over Lucas's trust claiming parental rights to funds they'd helped establish. Local news picked up Emma's version of events after she contacted a reporter with her tale of family betrayal. The story ran with her engagement photos painting her as a young woman trying to build a life while dealing with family dysfunction. They interviewed her outside the million-dollar homes she couldn't afford Brad's arm around her as she dabbed at dry eyes. My phone rang constantly with reporters seeking my response to allegations of financial manipulation and elderly parent abandonment. My grief support group, the one safe space where I'd found understanding, asked me to take a break from meetings. Other members felt uncomfortable with the controversy. The facilitator explained, worried that my presence would distract from their healing process. The very people who'd held me while I sobbed over Lucas's empty chair now avoided eye contact in the grocery store. Emma's narrative had poisoned even this sacred space, where broken parents tried to survive their worst nightmares. The third week brought legal documentation that made my blood run cold. My parents had filed an emergency petition as co-trustees, but they'd added claims about my fitness as Lucas's mother. They suggested his medical expenses showed financial mismanagement, that experimental treatments had been unnecessary vanity projects. Emma's statement claimed I'd refused traditional medicine in favor of expensive alternatives, prolonging Lucas's suffering for attention. The fact that every treatment had been recommended by leading oncologists didn't appear in their version. Brad's family lawyer, joining the case, signaled new depths of coordination. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about power and punishment for refusing to comply. They filed injunctions trying to freeze the trust, claiming immediate, irreparable harm to Emma's future. The legal fees alone would destroy most families, but they'd found backing from Brad's connections. I realized they intended to bury me in paperwork until I surrendered from exhaustion. The attempted forced sale of my house revealed how deep their research went. My parents claimed partial ownership based on a $10,000 loan they'd given us for closing costs, conveniently forgetting David had repaid it within 6 months. They'd found the initial paperwork, but ignored the satisfaction of debt documents. Their lawyer argued that verbal promises of ownership had been made, producing affidavits from Emma about overheard conversations that never happened. Anonymous complaints flooded my employer, each one crafted to hit different pressure points: allegations of embezzlement, suggestions of inappropriate behavior, claims about using work computers for personal legal battles. HR launched an investigation they assured me was routine, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. My supervisor, who'd given me extended leave during Lucas's illness, now questioned every sick day I'd taken. The systematic destruction of my professional reputation followed Emma's social media playbook perfectly. Maria, my best friend since college, and now a successful attorney, began her investigation with the determination of someone who'd held me through too many dark nights to let this injustice stand. She started with public records, pulling property deeds and financial filings that painted a disturbing picture. My parents had remortgaged their house 3 times in the past decade, each time to fund another of Emma's ventures. The house they'd bought for $200,000 was now leveraged for over $600,000 with foreclosure notices already filed. The credit reports Maria accessed through legal channels revealed the full extent of their financial desperation. Over $200,000 in credit card debt spread across 17 different cards, all with Emma listed as an authorized user. The purchase history showed designer goods, luxury vacations, and business investments that never generated returns. They'd been living off borrowed time and money long before Lucas got sick, maintaining a facade of prosperity that was crumbling from within. Emma's relationship with Brad took on new dimensions as Maria's investigator friends shared their findings. His previous 2 engagements had ended identically with families unable to meet his financial expectations for partnership. The first fiancé's father had owned a small business. Brad thought he could absorb backing out when he discovered their debt load. The second came from old money that turned out to be old stories, her trust fund, a fiction her parents maintained for appearances. Emma was attempt number 3, and he'd been getting impatient. The investigation into Brad's development company revealed layers of fraud and misdirection. His impressive office was leased month to month. His project portfolio consisted mainly of artist renderings for buildings that never broke ground. Current lawsuits from 3 former partners alleged embezzlement and contract fraud. His lifestyle was funded by a series of investors who thought they were buying into luxury developments that existed only in carefully crafted presentations. Emma wasn't just a mark, she was a co-conspirator who knew the truth but believed her special touch could reform him. Late one night, while sorting through boxes of David's papers in search of loan documentation, I found an old external hard drive. David had been meticulous about backing up important documents, a habit from his military days. Hidden among tax returns and business contracts, I discovered email threads between my parents and Emma dating back 2 years. The messages started when Lucas first showed symptoms, discussing possibilities and probabilities with chilling detachment. The emails revealed a coordinated campaign that began before Lucas was even diagnosed. Emma had researched childhood cancer survival rates, forwarding articles about terminal cases to my parents. They'd discussed timeline scenarios, planning their approach based on different prognoses. One thread, titled Estate, Planning for Inevitable Outcomes, showed they'd consulted 3 lawyers before finding one willing to exploit the emergency clause. My mother's message, stating the boy won't last past summer, was dated 2 weeks before we even knew he had cancer. Reading deeper, I found they'd created a full strategy around my emotional vulnerability. Notes about my mental state, documentation of crying episodes, records of times I'd seemed unstable while managing Lucas's care. They'd assigned Emma to befriend the hospital social worker, gathering information about my coping mechanisms and support systems. Every moment of maternal grief had been cataloged as evidence of unfitness, building a case while I fought to save my baby's life. The pediatric oncologist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, was horrified when Maria approached her with questions. She remembered my parents visiting exactly twice during Lucas's 2-year battle, both times staying less than 15 minutes. Her notes reflected concerns about their absence, particularly during critical procedures when Lucas had asked for his grandparents. She documented my round-the-clock presence, sleeping on hospital chairs, learning to manage his medications, becoming an expert in pediatric cancer through desperate necessity. Her statement demolished their claims about my fitness as a mother. 3 nurses from the oncology ward came forward independently, each with similar stories. They'd watched me sing Lucas to sleep through chemotherapy, seen me research every clinical trial that might buy more time, witnessed me fighting insurance companies for coverage. They also remembered Emma's single visit where she'd spent the entire time on her phone and complained about the hospital smell. One nurse, Jennifer, had overheard Emma telling someone that at least the trust fund would be intact, a comment made while Lucas was vomiting from treatment 10 feet away. The hospital social worker's records proved especially damning. She documented multiple concerns about the grandparents' lack of involvement and emotional support. Her notes described them as displaying unusual detachment and making comments about quality of life that seemed premature. She'd actually recommended family counseling to address their absence, which they'd declined, citing busy schedules. Her professional opinion was that they'd emotionally disconnected from Lucas the moment his prognosis became uncertain. David's parents, whom I'd grown closer to through shared grief, revealed they'd been suspicious of my family for years. David had confided his concerns about their treatment of me, even considering legal ways to protect our assets from future interference. They'd kept quiet to avoid causing conflict, but now provided documentation of loans they'd given us that my parents tried to claim as their own. David's mother showed me a letter he'd written but never sent, outlining why he wanted to limit my family's access to Lucas's inheritance. The private investigator Maria hired uncovered the full scope of the deception. Phone records showed hundreds of calls between Emma, my parents, and various lawyers during Lucas's final months. They'd scheduled meetings with financial advisors about trust management while I was sleeping on hospital floors. Their search history included terms like breaking irrevocable trusts and challenging trustee competency. They'd been building their case with the cold efficiency of corporate raiders, viewing my dying son as an obstacle to their financial goals. The memorial garden I created for Lucas became my sanctuary in the weeks after his funeral. I'd planted a small oak tree surrounded by his favorite flowers with a bench where I could sit and feel close to him. Wind chimes he'd made in art class hung from the branches, their gentle melody bringing moments of peace. Coming home to find it destroyed felt like losing him all over again. The tree was uprooted, flowers scattered the bench, overturned and broken. Soil was everywhere dug up in what looked like a frenzied search. My security system had captured everything in high definition. Emma arrived first, carrying shovels and garbage bags, followed by my parents in work clothes I'd never seen them wear. They methodically destroyed every element of the memorial, digging deep holes around where the tree had stood. My mother used a metal detector, sweeping it across the disturbed earth. Emma filmed portions on her phone, providing commentary about searching for evidence in what she called a crime scene. They spent 3 hours excavating my backyard looking for money they'd convinced themselves I'd buried. The police officer who responded to my call seemed sympathetic until he learned it was my family who'd done the damage. Family disputes were civil matters, he explained, especially when no one was hurt and nothing of monetary value was stolen. The memorial garden held only emotional worth, not the kind that law enforcement could quantify. He suggested I pursue a restraining order through family court, then left me standing among the ruins of my sanctuary, while neighbors peered through curtains at the spectacle. Emma's video appeared online before I'd finished cleaning up the destroyed garden. She'd edited it cleverly, making it seem like they were conducting a reasonable investigation into hidden assets. The narrative painted me as someone who'd buried cash and valuables rather than properly managing estate funds. She'd tagged it with true crime hashtags, attracting viewers who loved amateur detective content. Comments poured in, supporting their search, encouraging them to check other locations, turning my grief into entertainment for strangers who didn't know they were watching a grave desecration. The boycott campaign they organized showed the depth of their community connections. My parents had lived in the same town for 40 years, building relationships I'd never cultivated while focused on Lucas's care. They visited local businesses with printed flyers about supporting financial abuse, claiming I'd stolen from elderly parents and a struggling sister. The coffee shop where I'd found comfort banned me after they threatened protests. The grocery store manager asked me to shop elsewhere to avoid disruptions. Even the pharmacy where I'd filled Lucas's medications suggested I transfer prescriptions to avoid confrontations. Their petition to remove me from the school board, where I volunteered for childhood cancer awareness, gained over 500 signatures. They'd crafted a narrative about financial impropriety and emotional instability that resonated with people who didn't know the truth. The board president called me personally his discomfort obvious, as he suggested a temporary leave of absence until the situation resolved. The program I'd started to provide support for families with hospitalized children would continue without me. He assured, as if that softened the blow. My employer's suspension came with bureaucratic politeness that barely masked their eagerness to distance themselves from controversy. The anonymous complaints had created a paper trail they couldn't ignore, regardless of their validity. Pending investigation became indefinite leave without pay, with strong suggestions that resignation might be cleaner for everyone involved. The HR director who'd sent flowers when Lucas died now avoided eye contact, treating me like a liability rather than a grieving mother who'd never missed a deadline despite living in hospitals. The bank froze my accounts based on suspicious activity reports my parents had filed. They'd claimed elder abuse and financial exploitation, providing enough documentation to trigger automatic holds. Accessing my own money required lawyers and court orders I couldn't afford with frozen funds. The circular trap they'd created was elegant in its cruelty, using systems designed to protect the vulnerable as weapons against their intended beneficiary. I survived on credit cards while fighting to prove I hadn't stolen from myself. Emma's restraining order application was a masterpiece of fiction, alleging threats and harassment that existed only in her imagination. She claimed I'd stalked her at wedding venues, sent threatening messages, and made her fear for her safety. The temporary order was granted without my presence, standard procedure that meant I couldn't go within 500 feet of her. This effectively banned me from my childhood neighborhood, my parents' church, and half the town's businesses where she might appear. The final hearing would come, but the damage to my reputation was immediate. The psychiatric evaluation attempt revealed how long they'd been planning this assault. My parents presented concerned family letters dating back months expressing worry about my mental state. They'd recruited distant relatives who'd never met Lucas to sign statements about my erratic behavior at family gatherings I hadn't attended. The judge saw through the obvious manipulation, but the mere filing of such papers created public records that would follow me forever. Anyone searching my name would find suggestions of mental instability, their intended outcome, regardless of legal results. Discovering the journal changed everything. Hidden in a box of Christmas decorations in my basement, I found my mother's diary from the year Lucas was born. Her entries revealed decades of resentment about my existence. The unplanned pregnancy that derailed her dreams before Emma's planned arrival restored hope. She'd written about Lucas as another obstacle, a grandchild who would drain resources from Emma's future children. The final entry, dated the week before his diagnosis, expressed hope that something would happen to free up the money being wasted on my branch of the family tree. The community battle reached its peak when they tried to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. They arrived with 2 officers and a mental health professional, claiming I'd made suicidal statements and posed a danger to myself. The evaluation lasted 4 hours, during which I had to prove my sanity while processing their betrayal. The psychiatrist found no grounds for commitment, noting instead signs of complex grief and post-traumatic stress from sustained family abuse. Her report became crucial evidence, turning their weapon against them. Maria's legal research uncovered the silver bullet hidden in plain sight within the trust documents. David, with foresight I only now appreciated, had insisted on language specifically excluding my parents and sister from any control or benefit. The clause was ironclad, written by his military lawyer friend who'd seen too many families torn apart by money. It stated that any attempt by specifically named individuals to access the trust would result in immediate enforcement of a no-contact order and potential criminal charges for fraud. My parents had signed acknowledgement of these terms at the trust's creation, their own signatures, now their downfall. The judge reviewing our case was a grandmother who'd lost her own grandchild to cancer. She read through thousands of pages of evidence with growing disgust at my family's behavior. The emails planning their assault while Lucas was dying particularly affected her. She issued an immediate cease and desist order, threatening contempt charges if they continued any form of contact or harassment. The trust was affirmed as untouchable, with additional protections added against future challenges. Her ruling included damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, setting a precedent for similar cases. Local investigative journalist Amanda Chen had been following our story since Emma's first social media posts. She'd sensed something wrong with the narrative, spending weeks verifying facts and interviewing witnesses. Her exposé ran as a 3-part series featuring security footage of the Memorial Garden destruction emails, showing premeditation and interviews with medical staff who'd witnessed my devotion to Lucas. The public response was swift and devastating to my family's reputation. Emma's follower count plummeted as people realized they'd been manipulated into supporting abuse. Brad's family withdrew from the engagement within hours of the first article's publication. His mother called Emma personally to retrieve the family heirloom ring, which turned out to be recently purchased and returnable. Brad himself vanished without explanation, moving on to his next target in another state. Emma's public meltdown on social media, blaming me for ruining her life, only reinforced the narrative of entitlement and cruelty. Her wedding vendors demanded deposits back, threatening legal action for breach of contract when she couldn't pay. The foreclosure on my parents' house proceeded rapidly once their financial house of cards collapsed. Without Emma's impending marriage to wealthy Brad, they had no backup plan for their mounting debts. The bank showed no mercy for elderly customers who'd over-leveraged themselves funding an adult child's fantasies. They were given 30 days to vacate the home they'd mortgaged beyond value. Their church, learning the full truth through the newspaper articles, revoked their board positions and suggested they worship elsewhere. Emma's arrest for embezzlement shocked everyone except those who'd watched her escalating desperation. She'd been skimming from her employer for months, small amounts she thought wouldn't be noticed. The total exceeded $50,000 funding her lifestyle while waiting for my son's trust fund. Her termination came with criminal charges that no expensive lawyer could make disappear. The local jail's booking photo showed a woman who'd aged years and weeks, her carefully maintained image crumbling with her plans. Multiple victims of my family's previous schemes came forward after reading about our case. A cousin revealed how they'd convinced her to invest in Emma's boutique, promising returns that never came. Former friends described loans never repaid investments that vanished always with elaborate explanations and guilt trips. The pattern stretched back decades. A trail of financial exploitation hidden behind family loyalty and social pressure. Several victims joined together for a class action suit seeking recovery of funds long written off as losses. My return to work came with full back pay and a formal apology from the company. The HR director who'd suspended me was transferred, and new policies were implemented regarding anonymous complaints. My colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth, many sharing their own stories of family betrayal they'd never discussed before. The Childhood Cancer Awareness Program at the school board was renamed in Lucas's honor, with my full reinstatement to lead it. The community that had shunned me now rallied in support. The establishment of the Lucas Memorial Fund fulfilled a promise I'd whispered at his bedside. Using the trust money he'd never need, and the settlement from the harassment suit, I created a foundation providing free housing for families with hospitalized children. The first Lucas house opened 6 months after his death, offering 10 apartments within walking distance of the children's hospital. Families who'd slept in their cars or hospital waiting rooms now had safe, comfortable spaces during their darkest hours. The opening ceremony drew hundreds of supporters, including many who'd initially believed Emma's lies. My parents' attempts to contact me through intermediaries were met with legal enforcement of the no-contact order. They'd moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town, both working minimum-wage jobs to survive. Their retirement funds spent on Emma's dreams were gone. Their social circle, built on decades of false prosperity, evaporated. The golden child they'd sacrificed everything for was serving a 2-year sentence for embezzlement. The daughter they'd dismissed had survived their assault and thrived despite their cruelty. 6 months after Lucas's death, the first families moved into Lucas House. I stood in the courtyard watching children play while their parents found momentary peace. A mother whose daughter was undergoing chemotherapy hugged me with tears streaming down her face. She'd been sleeping in her car for weeks, showering at truck stops, trying to stay strong for her baby. Now she had a real bed, a kitchen to cook healthy meals, and a support system of families who understood. Lucas's legacy was becoming more beautiful than I'd imagined possible. The year anniversary of his death arrived with unexpected peace. I'd spent months in therapy working through grief complicated by trauma and betrayal. My therapist helped me understand that my parents had never truly seen me as anything more than a resource for Emma. Their love, conditional and transactional, had nothing to do with my worth as a person or mother. Learning to separate their sickness from my reality took time, but Lucas's memory deserved a mother not poisoned by bitterness. I could honor him best by helping others, not harboring hatred. My parents now lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the constant rumble of washing machines their new soundtrack. They'd applied for various assistance programs, swallowing the pride that once made them too good for a mechanic's son-in-law. Their attempts to reconcile through flying monkeys were consistent but futile. Church members they'd manipulated for years now understood the truth and refused to carry messages. The narrative they'd crafted had collapsed, leaving them exposed as the architects of their own destruction. Emma's letters from prison started arriving monthly, each one a masterclass in manipulation disguised as redemption. She wrote about finding faith, understanding her wrongs, needing forgiveness to heal. By the 3rd letter, she was requesting money for commissary items. By the 5th, she needed legal fees for an appeal. I read each one at Lucas's grave, sharing them with him like the bedtime stories we'd never finish. Then I burned them in a metal bowl, watching her words turn to ash and drift away on the wind. The dating world felt impossible until I met Michael at a grief support group for widowed parents. He'd lost his wife and daughter in an accident 3 years prior, understanding the dual grief of losing a partner and child. Our first coffee lasted 4 hours, talking about everything except our losses. He made me laugh for the first time since Lucas's diagnosis, a sound so foreign I'd almost forgotten I could produce it. We took things slowly, 2 broken people, learning that shattered hearts could still hold love. Lucas House expanded faster than planned, with donations pouring in from families who'd experienced medical financial trauma. Corporate sponsors emerged touched by our mission and the stories of families we'd helped. The second house opened on the 1st anniversary of Lucas's death, then a third 6 months later. Each location was staffed with social workers, counselors, and volunteers who understood the unique challenges of having a hospitalized child. We provided not just housing, but community, ensuring no family faced their nightmare alone. Speaking engagements at conferences about financial abuse in grieving families became part of my healing journey. I shared our story with rooms full of social workers, lawyers, and healthcare providers, educating them about predatory family behavior during vulnerable times. The presentations were difficult, requiring me to relive the worst moments of my life. But every time someone approached afterward with their own story, finding strength in mine, I knew Lucas would be proud of his mama for turning pain into purpose. The 2-year anniversary brought unexpected closure. I was placing fresh flowers at Lucas's grave when I noticed a small envelope tucked behind his headstone. Inside a single photograph, Lucas at the beach building sandcastles with pure joy on his face. No note, no identification, just this gift from someone who'd loved him. Whether it was a nurse, a teacher, or someone else whose life he'd touched, I never knew. But it reminded me that his impact extended beyond our small circle, that love outlasts loss in ways we can't always see. Emma's release from prison came with predictable drama. She'd been banned from our town as part of her parole, but social media had no such boundaries. Her attempts to restart her influencer career failed spectacularly, with comments sections filled with people who remembered her cruelty. She moved across the country, last I heard, working at a call center and living with roommates who didn't know her history. The golden child had become tarnished beyond repair, her entitlement replaced by the harsh reality of consequences. My wedding to Michael was small, held in the courtyard of the first Lucas house. David's parents walked me down the aisle, having become the family I'd chosen over the one I'd been born into. Lucas's photo sat on an empty chair in the front row, his spirit present in the children playing nearby. Michael's surviving son served as ring-bearer, our blended family forming from shared loss and newfound love. The ceremony was about hope, proving that life could bloom again after devastating winters. Today, 5 Lucas houses operate across 3 states, providing refuge for over 200 families annually. The trust fund my family tried to steal has multiplied through careful investment and generous donations, ensuring Lucas's name will help suffering families for generations. I keep his dinosaur suit in my closet, sometimes holding it when the grief feels too heavy. But mostly I focus on living the life he'd want me to have filled with purpose, love, and the knowledge that good can emerge from unimaginable evil. Standing at his grave on quiet mornings, I tell Lucas about the families he's helping, about the mother who finished her degree while her son was in treatment, able to study because she had safe housing, about the father who kept his job because he didn't have to sleep in hospital chairs, about siblings who could stay together during their brother's chemotherapy, maintaining family bonds during crisis. His 8 years of life created ripples of compassion that will outlast us all. Sometimes I wonder if my parents understand what they lost in their pursuit of money. They traded their daughter's love and grandson's memory for a dream that evaporated like morning mist. Emma got her inheritance after all, a criminal record destroyed reputation, and the knowledge that she caused immeasurable pain to the only sister who might have loved her despite everything. The golden child discovered that pyrite crumbles under pressure, leaving nothing but dust and regret, but I don't dwell on their choices anymore. Bitterness is a poison I refuse to drink, especially when Lucas's memory deserves better. Instead, I focus on the families sleeping safely tonight because of him, on the love Michael and I have built from ashes, on the chosen family who showed up when blood relatives revealed their true nature, on the truth that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well and helping others do the same. To everyone watching who's faced family betrayal during their darkest moments, know that you're not alone. The people who should protect us sometimes become our greatest threats, but that says nothing about your worth or your loved one's memory. Honor those you've lost by living fully, helping others, and refusing to let cruelty define your story. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced family betrayal during grief? How did you find the strength to move forward? Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of triumph over adversity, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they can survive their family's cruelty. Thank you for letting me share Lucas's story with you. May you find peace in your own journey, and remember that chosen family often loves us better than blood ever could.